Sometimes when you're programming, you have code or little bits and pieces that you don't want to share with the entire world. And I'm not talking that just you're embarrassed with your programming. I'm talking about things like API keys, email addresses, passwords, stuff that counts as private, but maybe you still want to post code on the internet, right? Maybe you want to contribute to an open source project. Maybe you want to create your own open source project. Maybe you want to post example code online. Maybe you just want to put some of your homework or something like that up on the web so people know what you're working on. The issue is, if I post, let's say, this file right here to the internet, suddenly people know a lot of things I might not want them to know about. For example, this is an API key. It's used for accessing a service, and I might, pay money in order to be able to access this service. Someone else takes this API key, they can pretend to be me, run up my bills, all kinds of terrible things. Additionally, down here, it's my email address. Maybe I want to keep my email address private instead of letting anyone on the internet know what it is. Same thing with this password here. If someone has this information, maybe they can log into my account, lock me out of it, steal my stuff, whatever. So the issue is, it's fine when these are on my computer, but if, for example, I commit all of this and push it up to GitHub, I'm going to be in a bad place because anyone who looks at my code on GitHub is going to be able to get my API key, is going to be able to get my email, is going to be able to get my password. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to learn how to use a tool called .env in order to hide things like API keys, email addresses, passwords from being visible on GitHub. So the tool is python-dotenv. It's been around for a long time. It's great. It's a delight. The first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to need to install it. So just like everything else in the world of Python, we're going to use pip install. In order to pip install it, it's not pip install.env, it's pip install python.env. I've already installed it, but I'm just going to run it again because, hey, why not? The Python that you have in Visual Studio Code might not be the same Python you run elsewhere on your computer, places like Terminal, places like Jupyter Notebooks, things like that. So just run pip install where you normally install it. I'm just running it here to keep everything in the same place. Now, what we need to do first is reorganize our code. Right now, our API keys, our emails, our passwords are just kind of pushed into everything else. In terms of keeping things clean and nice, I'm going to create some variables up at the top that are my API key, that are my email address, that are my password. And so I'm going to copy them up here, copy it up here, and then I'm going to go back and say this is password, this is email address, and this is API key. One thing to note here is even though this changed color, this is actually not right. What we need to do is go over here and turn it into an F string. If you're not familiar with F strings, they're kind of like fill in the blank strings for Python. So this is going to do the same thing it did before, where it just said, hey, here's how the API key works. So if I run this code, it's going to print out that URL with the API key, and it's going to print out this login information here using those variables up top. Now, what we need to do, as long as we have the API key, the email address, and the password inside of this py file, when we upload this py file to GitHub, everyone's going to be able to see it. What .env allows us to do is move it into a separate file. And funnily enough, the file's name is .env. .env file. So what we're going to do is, there are a few different ways to do this. I like to just right-click, new file, .env. Now, files that start with dots are kind of like secret files or private files. They usually don't show up on your file browser, and they're just kind of, the dot signals this file is not for mere mortals. It is for people who know what they're doing. It doesn't magically make it disappear. We'll deal with that later on, but just know that there's nothing necessarily special about env or .env, except that it's a common way to say this is a special kind of file. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all of this information and just paste it right into the .env file. And I'm going to say, hey, my API key is this, my email address is this, and my password is this. Easy peasy, nothing crazy going on here. Pretty simple, right? All we did was move those declarations into the .env file. And now what we need to do is figure out how to move them from the .env file into this file. In order to do that, you need to read through the documentation here and add these 2 lines. You're actually going to end up adding 3 lines, but we'll start with these 2. So what these lines do is the first one says, hey, I want to load the .env library. And this line right here says, I want you to load the .env file. So if we run the code right now, as it stands, it's not really going to do anything. My API key is blank, my email is blank, my password's blank. It didn't magically fill in these variables. What it did is it created something called environment variables. And what environment variables are they're just kind of things that are floating around on your computer that are, I don't know, usable all over the place. They're variables that you don't set in your code. They're just things that your computer knows. In order to get them from your computer, in order to talk to your computer, we're going to use OS. So if you go here, you can say, this is what it's talking about here. Code of your application, which uses the environment variables. So hidden variables that your computer just knows about. So for example, one common one that your computer will know about is something called the path. The path is all of the different folders on your computer where when I type a command, it tries to find the command in those files. So if I run that, it says these are all of the places. This is my secret path environment variable. If I type Python, it will search in all of these folders in order to find Python. If I type, NVM, it'll search in all of those. If I type code, it will search in all of those. They're just variables you don't set in your code that your computer knows about. Now, every one of the ones in here, API key, email address, and password, are now in our environment. So I can actually say, hey, give me the API key environment variable. Hey, give me the email address environment variable. Hey, give me the password environment variable. And now when I run this, it works great. .env loaded everything from the .env file, threw it into our computer, and now we're able to get it without actually putting the code or without actually putting the API key, email address, or password into our Python file. This is only half the battle though. We have now successfully moved it out of app.py, but it's still hiding in .env. This becomes an issue when we start to use Git or GitHub in order to push our data up. I'm showing you this in GitHub Desktop because it's easy to look at, but there are plenty of, you could use the command line, anything like that. So right here, GitHub Desktop is telling us we have 2 changed files. One of them is app.py, which looks fine, no more secret information in there, and the other one is .env, which has all of our secret information in there. One thing you could do is just uncheck .env and then just type all of a little description about adding app.py, commit, everything's good. The problem is every time you commit, you have to remember to not add .env. You have to be very careful to never add this into Git, to never send it up to GitHub. I'm pretty forgetful, I'm pretty lazy, so I don't want to have to remember to check or uncheck or whatever this every single time. In comes another file. This file is called .gitignore. What .gitignore does is it is a list of files that you should not add to Git. Now, should not, it's a little more serious than that. These are files that Git will ignore. So if I type .env in this list of files, it's going to be the only file in here for now, but if I type .env in here and I go here, suddenly it's disappeared. Suddenly .env doesn't show up on this list anymore because the gitignore knows, hey, gitignore says .env. Hey Git, just ignore it. And Git says, okay, ignoring .env. You usually add a lot more files than just .env to that. I recommend going to gitignore.io. Got bought, didn't work for a while, but it's really easy for me to say I'm using Python, I'm using OS X, I use Visual Studio Code, maybe I do a little bit of node work every now and again. Maybe sometimes I open up stuff on Windows, and it would create a list of all of these files that get ignored. So I'm going to copy and paste this into my gitignore. And it's not saying that we're ignoring, Python files, node files, every file that's made on OS X, every file that's made on Windows. It's saying these are common files that show up, such as .env, maybe different .env files for test and production, cache files, temporary files, files that you really wouldn't want to add to version control that aren't really important to you. So it's not just secret files, it's also files that don't matter at all. And once we push that updated gitignore, now none of these files will ever be committed to the Git repository. So if we had a second API key, when we had whatever in here, we update that. It doesn't show up on GitHub desktop, but we can still access another key inside of app.py. So I can print os gitenv another key, and it will magically show up. There's our key. It just pulled it straight out of .env. And yeah, that's pretty much how .env works. It's very useful. The one thing I will warn you is if you are doing this in a Jupyter Notebook, which is probably what you're doing if you're working with APIs, you have to be careful to not, let's say, print out these URLs. So if I'm doing a bunch of data analysis on an API and I save my API keys into .env, it'll work fine. But then if I'm actually printing out all of my URLs, so I'm printing out all of my login info instead of just using it, anyone who looks at my notebook is going to be able to see all of that information. So if you, just use request to grab that URL, just use whatever library in order to process that information there and never print it out, your life will be a lot better. One final thing is because this .env file doesn't live in version control, if you go into your repository, and everything on your computer disappears, and then you clone your repository to a new place. Let me publish this. I'll keep it public because why not? If I go here and let's say I clone this or I download all of this code, I will no longer have the .env file. So I will no longer have an API key, email address, or password. If I want to reuse this code, if I want to move it on my computer or install it on another computer, I have to make sure I have a .env file. Usually that means you just have to create a new one, but you should pay attention to or keep safe your API key, your email addresses, and your passwords, because they're not hanging out on GitHub for security reasons. And they will be on your computer until you delete them, until your computer explodes, anything like that. So yeah, keep that .env file safe somewhere else. But you know, because you're using the magic of gitignore and the magic of the .env Python library, you are now able to be nice and safe and secure with all of your private stuff here. Also, if you're using Jupyter Notebook, just put .env in the same file or in the same folder as your notebook, and you'll be good to go. All right, that's it.